The child's handprints on the frost-covered glass looked like a ghost trying to push through from the other side. Silas Hartwell hadn't slept proper in 19 years, and he wasn't sleeping now, just standing at the window past midnight, watching the cottonwoods bend and moan in the October wind. Then the wind stopped, dead stopped, like God had held his breath. That's when he saw it. 5 small fingers pressed hard against the outside of the glass, the frost melting in rings around each one. He opened the window. A girl crouched beneath it, flour sack dress, one shoe missing, bruises on her thin arms, like storm clouds that hadn't finished raining. She didn't flinch, didn't beg, just looked up at him with eyes he hadn't seen in 19 years, his dead wife's eyes. Neither of them spoke. The wind started again, but softer now, almost gentle, like it had delivered what it came to deliver. He hadn't let anyone pass the threshold in 6 years. But the blood on her lip was still wet, and the wind had teeth. Silas reached down and lifted her through the window. She weighed nothing, corn husk and bone, light as grief. He set her on the floor by the wood stove, and she didn't make a sound, just pulled her knees to her chest and watched him the way a rabbit watches a hawk. "You hurt?" She shook her head, a lie. He knew it, the way he knew weather, something in the air that didn't match the words. He knelt down slow, keeping his hands where she could see them. The split on her lip had scabbed and broken open again, probably from the cold. Bruises wrapped her wrists like dark bracelets, finger-shaped, and her bare foot was bleeding from creek rocks. She'd run a fair distance, run hard. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said. She didn't answer, just kept watching his hands. He stood and crossed to the kitchen. Coffee was still warm on the stove. He poured a cup, too strong for a child, but it was all he had. When he brought it back, she took it with both hands and held it against her chest like it was something precious. Steam rose between them. "Who did this to you?" Silence. "Where you from?" Her voice came out small but steady, like she'd practiced keeping it flat. "Don't matter where I'm from, matters I ain't going back." Silas looked at her a long moment. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had picked up again, throwing handfuls of sleet against the windows. "Fair enough," he said. He found bandages in the cabinet Eleanor had organized years ago. Strips of clean cotton, a tin of salve gone hard at the edges, a bottle of iodine that still had its seal. He brought a basin of warm water and knelt in front of the girl. "Gonna clean that foot. Might sting." She nodded once and extended her leg, mechanical, like she'd done this before. Like pain was just another chore. He worked careful, picking out the small stones, dabbing the cuts clean. She didn't flinch, not once. He'd seen men twice her age holler over less. This one just sat there, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the middle distance. "You got a name?" "Ruth Anne." Ruth Anne Castor. The name meant nothing to him. But something in the way she said it, like she was testing whether he'd recognize it, made him look up. "That's supposed to mean something to me?" "Don't know yet." He didn't push, just wrapped her foot in clean cotton and tied it off gentle. When he finished, he noticed she was shaking, not from cold, but from something held too long. The coffee cup trembled in her grip. A shadow moved in the doorway. Jonas Deer Creek stood there in his long coat, silver braids catching the firelight. He'd heard the commotion come up from the bunkhouse. His dark eyes moved from Silas to the girl and back again. He didn't ask questions, just nodded once, "She can stay," and stepped back into the night. Ruth Ann watched him go. "Who's that?" "Jonas. He's been with me longer than the mountains." "He Indian?" "Crow." She considered this. "He got kind eyes." Silas almost smiled. Almost. "Don't let him hear you say that. He's got a reputation to keep." He gave her a blanket, one of Eleanor's, wool with a blue stripe at the edge, and pointed to the settee by the fire. "You can sleep there tonight. We'll figure the rest come morning." But she didn't lie down, just sat there rigid, the blanket pulled around her shoulders like armor, staring at the flames. Silas lowered himself into the chair across from her. His bones ached. His chest ached worse. A familiar weight he'd learned to carry so long ago he'd forgotten it was there. Until now. Until this girl, with her silence and her bruises, sat in his house like a question he didn't know how to answer. Minutes passed. The fire settled. The wind moaned low and mournful through the cottonwoods. "You live here alone?" she asked finally. "Just me and Jonas. And the cattle." And she looked around the room. The high ceilings. The cold piano in the corner. The photographs on the mantel she couldn't quite see from here. "That's a lot of rooms for one man." Suppose it is." More silence. She pulled the blanket tighter. "You got a sadness on you," she said. Not a question, a fact, delivered plain as weather. "I can see it. Sits on your shoulders like snow that won't melt." Silas went still. No one had spoken to him like that in 20 years. No one had seen him in 20 years, not past the land and the cattle and the money. He was Silas Hartwell, the millionaire rancher, the man who'd built an empire out of nothing. He was not a man with sadness on his shoulders, except he was. And this child, This bruised wisp of a girl who weighed nothing and owned nothing and had appeared at his window like a ghost. She'd seen it in the first hour. "I got one too," she said, quieter now. A sadness. "Maybe that's why I found your gate." "What gate?" "The one with the iron sun. It was locked, but I found a gap in the fence. Crawled through." She paused. "Felt like it wanted me to." Silas's throat tightened. The iron sun gate. He'd had it forged the year Clara was born, a rising sun to welcome her into the world. He hadn't opened it since the day Eleanor left. "Get some sleep," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Morning comes early." She nodded and finally lay down, curling into the blanket like a child half her age. Within minutes, her breathing slowed. Evened. She was asleep. Silas sat watching her for a long time. The fire burned down to embers. The wind died to a whisper. He thought about the iron sun, rusted and chained. He thought about the gap in the fence he'd never bothered to fix. He thought about Eleanor's eyes, looking up at him from a face that wasn't hers. Somewhere outside, a coyote called. Another answered. The sounds faded into the dark. He didn't sleep. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in the not sleeping. Morning light made everything look softer. The bruises on her arms, the dust on his piano, the 19 years since anybody had set the table for two. Silas stood at the stove pushing eggs around a cast iron skillet, and the eggs were burning because he hadn't cooked for anyone but himself in so long he'd forgotten how to pay attention. Coffee boiled black and bitter. Biscuits sat heavy as river stones on a tin plate. He looked at the spread and felt something close to shame. Ruth Anne appeared in the doorway, the wool blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. She'd finger-combed her hair, but it stuck up in the back like straw after a windstorm. The swelling around her eye had gone down some. She looked younger in daylight, smaller. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the table. She sat, hands in her lap, back straight, waiting. He set a plate in front of her, burnt eggs, 2 biscuits, a cup of coffee he'd weakened with water. She looked at it like he'd laid down gold. "Thank you. It ain't much. It's more'n I had yesterday." She ate everything, didn't complain about the char on the eggs or the way the biscuits could break a tooth, cleaned her plate, and then looked at it like she wanted to lick it, but knew better. When she finished, she said thank you again, then a third time when he refilled her coffee. Silas didn't know what to do with gratitude. Made him itch. He grunted and turned back to the stove, scraping the burned bits into the slop bucket. The kitchen door opened and Jonas stepped in, bringing cold air and the smell of hay. He hung his hat on the peg, poured himself coffee, and sat down across from Ruth Anne like this was any other morning. Like there wasn't a bruised child at the table who hadn't been there yesterday. "You sleep all right?" he asked her. "Yes, sir." "That settee's got a broke spring on the left side. Pokes you if you ain't careful." "I found it. Figured you might." Something passed between them, not quite a smile, but close. Jonas had a way of making people feel seen without making them feel watched. Silas had never learned that trick. Ruth Ann's eyes moved around the kitchen, taking inventory. The dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beam, the flour tin with the dented lid, the window over the sink, glass thick and warped with age, and past that, visible through the rippled pane, the locked door at the end of the hall. She didn't ask about it, but Silas saw her notice. After breakfast, Ruth Anne washed her plate without being asked. Silas watched her from the corner of his eye, the way she handled the dish careful, like it might bite her, like she'd been punished before for breaking things. She dried it with a rag and set it back on the shelf in exactly the spot she'd seen him take it from. "You don't gotta do that," he said. "I don't mind." "Didn't say you minded. Said you don't gotta." She turned and looked at him, and for a moment he saw something flicker behind her eyes. Confusion, maybe, or the beginning of trust. Then it was gone. "Can I help with chores?" she asked. "No. I'm good with animals. I can muck stalls and haul water, and—" I said no. She closed her mouth, nodded once. But an hour later, when Silas came back from checking the north pasture, he found her in the barn with Jonas, learning how to brush down the horses. She had a curry comb in her small hand and was working it over the flank of his bay mare, and the mare, who'd kicked 2 ranch hands in the past year, stood calm as Sunday. Jonas caught his eye and shrugged. She asked. Silas didn't say anything, just watched for a moment, then walked away. By midday, she'd made herself useful in ways he couldn't object to. She gathered eggs from the henhouse without being shown where it was. She carried firewood from the pile to the porch, making 4 trips to his one. She found a broom somewhere and swept the kitchen floor, raising 19 years of dust that made them both cough. "You always work this hard?" Silas asked. "Work keeps trouble away." He didn't ask what kind of trouble. He already knew. They ate dinner in the same silence they'd eaten breakfast, not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar, like 2 people learning each other's shapes. She chewed, slow and thorough. He noticed she always left one bite on her plate, then ate it last, like she was saving proof that there'd been food at all. Afterward, he walked her around the ranch, the cattle pens, the hay barn, the smokehouse, the ice cellar dug into the North Hill. She listened to everything he said, asked questions that made sense, remembered the answers. When they reached the main pasture, she stopped and stared. All these yours? Every last one. 400 head of cattle spread across the valley, red and brown against the yellowing grass. Mountains rising behind them, already capped with early snow. The sky so big it made a person feel small and free at the same time. You must be rich as Croesus, she said. Silas almost laughed. Almost. Don't feel rich. She looked at him sideways, and he knew she was filing that away too. Another piece of the puzzle she was building. The big house with too many rooms. The piano nobody played, the locked door. The man who had everything and carried sadness like a stone. You got a cat, she said, pointing. A barn cat had emerged from the shadows, orange and white, one ear torn, meanest mouser in the territory. It walked straight to Ruth Anne and wound between her legs, purring. Jonas, who'd followed at a distance, shook his head. That cat don't like nobody. Scratched me 3 times this week. Ruth Anne knelt and scratched behind its torn ear. Maybe you ain't been polite enough. And Silas, standing there in the afternoon light, with his cattle and his land and his silence, felt something shift in his chest, something small, something warm. He didn't trust it. But he didn't push it away either. That evening, the light went gold and then gray and then gone. Silas lit the lamps, all but one, and Ruth Anne sat by the fire with the orange cat curled in her lap, both of them watching the flames like they held answers. She'd been quiet since supper, thinking quiet, not scared quiet. He was learning to tell the difference. Her eyes drifted to the mantel, to the photograph there, in its tarnished silver frame. Who's she? Silas didn't have to look to know which picture she meant. He felt it like a bruise pressed. My wife. She's real pretty. He took a long breath, let it out slow. Was. Ruth Anne didn't say sorry, didn't offer the soft words people usually offered, the ones that meant nothing and cost nothing. She just sat there, stroking the cat, letting the silence hold what words couldn't. She die of sickness? She asked finally. He stopped. The truth was complicated. Eleanor had left him first, left him for his coldness, his silence, his refusal to grieve out loud. She'd died 3 years later, alone, in a boarding house in Bozeman. He hadn't known until a letter came from a stranger. She passed, long time ago. Ian, you got the same eyes, Ruth Anne said. Sad ones. Hers in that picture, yours right now. A log popped in the fire. Loud, sharp. Ruth Anne flinched, the cat startled from her lap. And just like that, the softness in the room cracked open and Silas saw what lived underneath. The reflex, the fear, the body that had learned to brace before it learned to breathe. She recovered quick, sat up straight, smoothed her dress, but her hands were shaking. Silas waited a moment. Then, careful as he'd been with her wounded foot, the one who hurt you, he gonna come looking? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Ruth Anne. He's a deacon, she said, voice flat. Deacon Whitmore. Got papers that say I'm his. Got the sheriff and the church and everybody believing I'm the liar and he's the saint. She looked at Silas then, and her eyes were old, too old. Nobody believes a child over a man of God. Silas felt something turn in his chest, something sharp. I believe you? She blinked, once, twice, like she was waiting for him to take it back. He didn't. That night, after she'd fallen asleep on the settee, Silas walked to the window by the front door, the one that faced east, toward the road, toward town. There was a lamp there. Hadn't been lit in 6 years. Eleanor used to keep it burning whenever he was out riding. A signal, a promise. I'm waiting. Come home. He struck a match, touched it to the wick. The flame caught, small at first, then steady. He didn't know why he did it, didn't have words for the feeling in his chest. But when he looked back toward the settee, Ruth Ann's eyes were open, watching. She didn't speak, just looked at the lamp, then at him, then closed her eyes again. She slept through this night for the first time in 2 years. On the 3rd day, she asked about the locked door. He told her it was storage. First lie he'd told in years that made him feel like a coward. Ruth Anne had accepted the answer with a nod, but her eyes lingered on the brass handle a moment too long. She knew. Children always knew when adults were hiding something. They just learned not to push. That afternoon, while Silas was in the north pasture counting heads, Ruth Anne wandered. He told her to stay close to the house, but the land pulled at her. All that open space, all that sky, after years of cramped rooms and locked cellars. She walked past the barn, past the chicken coop, past the small hill where the cottonwoods bent together like old women sharing secrets. And then she found the gate. The iron sun gate stood at the main entrance to the ranch, 15 feet of wrought iron shaped into rays spreading outward from a central disc. It had been beautiful once. Now rust bled down its bars like old tears, and a heavy chain wrapped the posts, padlocked tight. Ruth Anne stood before it, small against the iron. The wind moved her hair. She reached out one hand and touched the cold metal. "Mama said, 'Find the iron sun,'" she whispered. "Said I'd know it when I saw it." The chain made a sound, low, almost a groan. She looked down. The padlock, rusted, ancient, untouched for years, had slipped its catch. The chain slithered through the bars like a living thing and fell to the frozen ground with a dull clank. The gate swung inward, just an inch, just enough to let the wind through. Ruth Anne stepped back, heart pounding. She hadn't pulled it, hadn't touched the lock. But the gate stood open now, and the afternoon light fell through the iron sun like something holy. Silas found her there 20 minutes later. She was sitting on a flat stone near the gate, knees pulled up, watching the iron bars catch the dying light. The chain lay coiled on the ground like a dead snake. "What happened here?" His voice came out sharper than he intended. "I don't know." She looked up at him, and there was no guile in her face. "I just touched it, and it fell." He walked to the gate, picked up the chain. The padlock was intact, not broken, not forced, just open, like it had decided to let go. Behind him, Jonas's voice came quiet. "That chain ain't slipped in 20 years. Silas didn't turn around. Wind. Wasn't no wind. Silence. The three of them stood there, the old rancher, the crow foreman, the bruised girl, looking at a gate that had been locked since grief first taught Silas Hartwell to build walls. "I didn't mean to break nothing," Ruth Anne said, small. "You didn't break it." Silas crouched down and looped the chain through the bars again, but he didn't padlock it, just wrapped it loose. "Go on back to the house. Supper soon." She went. Jonas stayed. "You gonna tell me you believe that was wind?" Jonas asked. "I'm gonna tell you I don't want to talk about it." Jonas nodded slow. He'd known Silas long enough to know when to leave a wound alone. But before he turned to go, he said, "Some things that's been locked up too long, they find their own way open. Don't matter if you're ready or not." That night, the stars came out thick and cold, and Silas found himself on the porch with a cup of coffee, gone lukewarm in his hands. Ruth Anne appeared beside him, blanket around her shoulders, and sat on the step below without asking permission. They watched the sky in silence. A coyote called somewhere in the dark. Another answered. "You ever have children?" she asked. The question hit him like a fist. He'd known it was coming, had felt it circling closer for 3 days, but that didn't make it easier. "Once." The word came out dry, scraped. "A girl, she died, long time ago." Ruth Anne didn't look at him, just kept watching the stars. "What was her name?" "Clara." "That's pretty. Means clear, like light." And he didn't ask how she knew that. Didn't trust his voice. "My mama died too," Ruth Anne said. 2 winters back. Consumption took her slow. She pulled the blanket tighter. "Before she passed, she told me things. About where I come from. About a debt owed. Well, what kind of debt?" "Didn't say exactly. Just said find the ranch with the iron sun. Said the man there owes me something he don't even know about." She paused. "Said you was a good man who forgot how to be good." Silas's hands tightened on the cup. The coffee was cold now, dead cold. "Your mama, what was her name?" Lillian Castor, but that wasn't her born name. She changed it when she was young, said she had to. Lillian. The name meant nothing to him. But something stirred in the back of his mind, something Eleanor had said once, years ago, in the middle of a fight. "You don't know everything about me, Silas. You never cared to ask." She ever mention a woman named Eleanor? Ruth Anne turned to look at him then, full on. Eleanor's eyes in a child's face. "That was my grandmother's name," she said. "Mama's mama. Never met her. She died before I was born." A pause. "How'd you know that?" The stars wheeled overhead. The coyotes had gone silent. Somewhere in the house, the lamp in the window flickered. Silas couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Eleanor had a daughter, before him, before Clara. A daughter she'd never told him about, hidden away, given to relatives, erased from the story of who she was. And that daughter had a daughter. And that daughter was sitting on his porch, wearing his dead wife's eyes, asking about a debt he was only now beginning to understand. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The cold crept in around them, but neither moved to go inside. Finally, Silas set down his cup. "Your mama ever tell you why your grandmother gave her up?" Said she was young, unwed. Said back then a girl in that situation didn't have choices. Ruth Anne pulled at a loose thread on the blanket. Said Eleanor cried when she handed her over. Cried so hard she couldn't stand. Silas closed his eyes. He could see it. Eleanor young, afraid, doing the only thing her world allowed her to do. Burying a child who wasn't dead. Building a new life on top of that grave. No wonder she'd never told him. No wonder she'd left when Clara died. She'd already lost one daughter to silence. She couldn't bear to lose another to his. "I ain't asking for nothing," Ruth Anne said quietly. "Mama said you owed a debt, but I ain't here to collect. She stopped, started again. "I just needed somewhere to go, somewhere he couldn't find me." "You got somewhere," Silas said. "Long as you need it." She looked at him, searching, waiting for the catch, the condition, the price that always came. He had nothing else to give her. Just the truth. I mean it. The days took on a rhythm after that. Ruth Anne helped with chores, feeding chickens, hauling water, brushing down the horses. She learned to make biscuits that didn't break teeth. She named the barn cat Biscuit, and Biscuit followed her everywhere like an orange shadow. She hummed while she worked, hymns mostly. Amazing Grace. How Great Thou Art, songs her mama must have taught her. Silas found himself listening for that humming, found himself looking for her when she wasn't in the room. It scared him how quick the house had filled, how loud the silence would be when she was gone, because she would be gone. He knew that. Whitmore would come, or the law would come, or she'd grow up and leave the way everyone left. That was how it worked. That was how it always worked. But for now, for these few days, she was here, and the lamp burned in the window every night, and the gate stayed unchained, and something in Silas Hartwell's chest was thawing whether he wanted it to or not. On the 5th morning, a rider came. Ruth Anne saw him first from the kitchen window. She went pale as milk and stepped back, hands gripping the counter. Silas walked out to meet him. The man was young, rough-dressed, worked for one of the spreads near town, but his horse had come from the direction of the church. "Looking for a runaway," the rider said. "Girl, about 11, yellow hair, simple dress, Deacon Whitmore's ward." "Ain't seen nobody," Silas said. The rider looked past him toward the house, toward the window where a small face had been and wasn't anymore. "You sure about that, Mr. Hartwell?" "I'm sure." The rider held his gaze a moment too long. Then he touched his hat brim and turned his horse back toward the road. Silas watched him go until he was a speck against the gray sky. The wind picked up, snow clouds massing on the horizon. Something was coming. He could feel it in his bones. The deacon rode up at noon with the sheriff and a piece of paper that made kindness a crime. Silas saw them coming from the barn, 2 riders, one in black, one wearing a tin star that caught the weak November sun. He set down the bridle he'd been mending and walked out to meet them, positioning himself between the riders and the house. Deacon Eli Whitmore dismounted first. He was soft in the middle, clean-shaved, wearing a black coat brushed free of dust. His hands were pale and smooth, hands that had never roped a steer or dug a post hole, hands that knew other kinds of work. "Mr. Hartwell," Whitmore smiled with his mouth. His eyes stayed flat as creek stones. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "Don't know what you're talking about." Sheriff Tom Adler climbed down slower, like his bones ached. He was a decent man, Tom. They'd shared whiskey more than once, talked cattle and weather and the slow dying of the frontier. But today, he wouldn't meet Silas's eyes. "Silas," Tom's voice was tired, "don't make this hard." Make what hard?" Whitmore reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. He held it out like a hymnal, reverent and sure. "Ruth Anne Castor is my legal ward. Her mother signed custody papers before she passed. Witnessed by the church, filed with the county." He let the paper hang in the air between them. "She ran off 5 days ago. Troubled child. Makes up stories. I only want what's best for her." Silas didn't take the paper. "What's best for her is staying away from whoever put those bruises on her arms." Whitmore's smile didn't falter. "Children fall. They play rough. They hurt themselves and blame others when they're caught in mischief." He tilted his head, all patience and pity. "Surely you understand. A man of your solitary nature might not recognize the discipline a child requires." "I recognize a lie when I hear one." "Do you?" Whitmore stepped closer. His voice dropped, soft as a knife sliding from a sheath. "Then perhaps you'll recognize this. I have a legal document. I have the sheriff. I have the weight of the church and the county behind me. What do you have, Mr. Hartwell? A big house? Empty rooms? A dead wife and a dead daughter and enough money to buy silence but not forgiveness?" The words hit like fists. Silas felt his hands curl at his sides. Tom Adler stepped between them. "Now hold on, both of you. Silas, is the girl here or not?" Before he could answer, the front door opened. Ruth Anne stood on the porch. She'd heard them coming, must have watched from the window. Her face was white as bone, but she held herself straight, chin up, the way she'd learned to hold herself when bracing for a blow. Whitmore's smile widened. "There she is, my wayward lamb." Ruth Anne didn't move, didn't speak. But her eyes went to Silas, and in them he saw something he hadn't seen before. Hope, fragile as frost, waiting to be shattered. "She ain't going with you," Silas said. "The law says otherwise." Then the law is wrong." Tom Adler rubbed his face with one hand. He looked older than his years, caught between a legal paper and the certainty in Silas Hartwell's voice. "Silas, I got no choice here. The document's valid, signed and witnessed." "Look at her, Tom. Look at her arms. Look at her face. Children get hurt. That don't prove... It proves enough." Whitmore stepped forward, and his voice carried now, pitched for an audience, though there was none but the wind. "Mr. Hartwell, I understand your attachment. A lonely man, a vulnerable child, an empty house." He paused, letting the implication settle like ash. Some might wonder what draws a recluse to take in a young girl. Some might ask questions. The accusation hung in the air, poison dressed as concern. "You're twisting this," Silas said, low and dangerous. "Am I?" Whitmore glanced toward the house. "What's behind that locked door, Mr. Hartwell? The one in the hallway, the one you keep shut so tight." Ruth Anne flinched. She'd asked about that door. She'd wondered. "That ain't none of your concern. And a man with secrets shouldn't throw stones." Whitmore spread his hands, the picture of reason. "I'm sure there's an innocent explanation. But the town talks, Mr. Hartwell. A millionaire hermit, a runaway girl, a locked room. People draw conclusions." Silas felt the ground shifting beneath him. Everything he'd built to protect himself was being turned into a weapon. The locked door that held Clara's memory, the solitude that held his grief. The kindness he'd finally dared to show, all of it twisted into something ugly. Jonas appeared at the corner of the house. He'd been listening. His face was carved from stillness, but his eyes burned. "That girl's got his wife's eyes," Jonas said quietly. "You noticed that, Deacon?" Whitmore turned, irritation flickering across his composure. "What?" "Eleanor Hartwell died 3 years back. That girl's got her eyes exact." Jonas walked closer, slow and deliberate. "Might be the law gives you a paper, but blood gives Mr. Hartwell a claim you ain't counted on." Ruth Anne looked between them, confusion and something like hope warring on her face. Silas found his voice. "Eleanor had a daughter before we married. She never told me. Gave her up young, kept it secret her whole life." He met Whitmore's eyes. "Ruth Anne's grandmother was my wife? That makes her kin. That makes this my business." Whitmore's mask slipped, just for a moment. A flash of something cold and calculating beneath the piety. Then it was gone, smoothed away like a wrinkle in cloth. "A convenient claim," he said. "Unprovable. Desperate." "I got letters," Silas lied. He didn't. But Whitmore didn't know that. "Eleanor kept letters from her daughter. I found them after she passed. Names, dates, enough to take to a judge." Whitmore's jaw tightened. He looked at Tom Adler. Tom looked at the ground. "This ain't settled," Whitmore said finally. "I'll be back tomorrow with a marshal from Helena, a federal man. You can tell your lies to him." He turned to Ruth Anne, and his voice went soft and sharp as a razor. "I'll see you soon, child. We have much to discuss about honesty and obedience." Ruth Anne didn't flinch this time. She just stared at him with those old eyes. Whitmore mounted his horse. Tom followed, still not meeting anyone's gaze. They rode back toward the road, toward the iron sun gate standing open in the distance. When they were gone, Ruth Anne walked down from the porch. She stopped in front of Silas. "You lied for me," she said. "I did." Why?" He looked at her. This child who'd appeared at his window like a ghost, who'd opened a gate that hadn't moved in 20 years, who carried his dead wife's eyes, and a debt he was only beginning to understand. "Because some things matter more than the truth," he said. "And you're one of them." Snow began to fall. The first flakes of the season, drifting down soft and silent as absolution. But absolution, Silas knew, was still a long way off. He opened the locked door that night. 19 years of dust rose like a congregation of ghosts. The snow had thickened after Whitmore left, falling steady and silent, covering the tracks of horses and men and lies. Ruth Anne had gone quiet, not her usual thinking quiet, but something deeper, wounded. She'd watched Silas through supper, watched him check the windows twice, watched him not eat a single bite of the stew she'd helped Jonas make. After she'd gone to bed on the settee, Silas stood in the hallway. The door was in front of him. The brass handle dull with years, the wood dark oak, same as the day he'd hung it. He'd walked past this door 10,000 times, touched the handle in the dark like a man touching a headstone. Never opened it, never once. Tonight, his hand closed around the brass and he turned it. The hinges groaned, a sound like something waking after long sleep. The door swung inward, and the smell hit him first. Dust and cedar and something faint beneath, something that might have been lavender once. Might have been the soap Eleanor used to wash Clara's hair. He stepped inside. The room was small, smaller than he remembered. A child's room, with a child's bed against the wall, white iron frame, white quilt yellowed with age. A window faced east, curtains drawn, fabric gone thin as old skin. A wooden chair sat in the corner where Eleanor used to sit and read stories aloud. A shelf held 3 books, their spines cracked. Mother Goose, Grimm's Fairy Tales, The Velveteen Rabbit, and on the pillow, exactly where Clara had left it 19 years ago, a porcelain doll, corn silk hair, blue glass eyes, a painted smile that hadn't faded. Eleanor had bought it for Clara's 2nd birthday. Clara had named it Rosie and carried it everywhere. To the barn, to the creek, to church on Sundays, tucked under her arm like a secret. Silas walked to the bed. His boots left prints in the dust, the first prints in 19 years. He reached down and picked up the doll. It weighed nothing, just cloth and porcelain and paint. But holding it, he felt the full weight of every day he'd refused to enter this room. Every night, he'd touched the handle and turned away. Every year, he'd let the dust settle thicker, as if burying the room could bury the grief. It hadn't. The grief was here, waiting, patient as stone. He sat down on the edge of the bed. The springs creaked. The quilt smelled of cedar and thyme. He held the doll against his chest, and he didn't cry. Hadn't cried in 19 years. Had forgotten how. But something cracked inside him, something that had been held too tight for too long. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Clara, I'm so sorry." The words fell into the dust and disappeared. He didn't hear her come in. Ruth Anne stood in this doorway, lamplight from the hall spilling around her small frame. She was wearing one of his old shirts as a nightgown, the hem dragging on the floor. Her feet were bare. Her eyes were wide. She looked at the room, at the small bed, at the doll in his hands, at the man sitting there like something hollowed out. This was hers, Ruth Anne said, not a question. Silas nodded, couldn't speak. Ruth Anne crossed the threshold. Her feet left smaller prints beside his in the dust. She walked to the bed and sat down next to him. Not close, but close enough. Her hands folded in her lap. "She was real pretty, wasn't she?" Ruth Anne said, looking at the doll. "Rosie, I mean. That's what you called her?" "Clara called her that. I don't know how you—" "It's stitched on her dress. See? Little letters." She was right. He'd never noticed. All these years, and he'd never looked close enough to see. Ruth Anne reached out and touched the doll's hair, gentle as a blessing. "My mama had a doll once. Lost it. When she was young. She used to talk about it sometimes, late at night. Said it was the only thing she had from before." She paused. Before she got given away. The connection hit Silas like a physical blow. Eleanor's daughter, Ruth Ann's mother, had been given away as an infant, with nothing but the clothes on her back, no doll, no keepsake, no proof she'd ever been wanted. And here was Clara's doll, preserved like a saint's relic, in a room kept holy for 19 years. All this love, locked away, all this grief hoarded like gold. What was she like? Ruth Anne asked. What was she like? The question opened something in him, something he'd kept sealed so long he'd forgotten it was there. She was... His voice broke. He tried again. She was springtime, that's what Eleanor used to say. Said Clara came into the world like springtime comes to the valley. All at once, changing everything. That's pretty. It was true. Ruth Anne was quiet for a moment. Then, how'd she die? The question he'd never answered. The question he'd spent 19 years running from. "Fever," he said. "Scarlet fever. Took her in 3 days." He stared at the doll's painted smile. "I wasn't here. I was in Billings, closing a cattle deal. Eleanor sent word she was sick, but I told myself she'd pull through. She was strong. She was always strong. But she didn't. No, she didn't." The snow fell harder outside the window, a white silence pressing against the glass. "I came back 2 days later," Silas said. "She was already buried. Eleanor had done it alone. Dug the grave herself 'cause I wasn't there to dig it." Ruth Anne didn't say anything, just sat there small and still, letting him speak. "She called for me, Clara did, at the end. She kept asking for her papa." His hands tightened on the doll. "And I was 60 miles away, shaking hands on a deal I can't even remember now. Counting cattle while my daughter died, calling my name." The words hung in the air, terrible and true. Ruth Anne reached over and put her hand on his arm. Her fingers were small and cold. "That ain't your fault," she said quietly. Something snapped. "Don't." Silas pulled away, standing up fast. The doll fell to the bed. "Don't tell me what's my fault and what ain't. You don't know. You weren't there." Ruth Anne flinched, but didn't move from the bed. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" The words came out harsh, jagged. "About Eleanor. About your mama. About this debt you keep talking about. Why'd you show up at my window like some kind of ghost and turn everything inside out?" "I didn't know." "You knew something. Your mama told you to find me, told you I owed her. But she didn't tell you what, did she? Just sent you here to collect on a debt I didn't even know existed. Ruth Ann's face had gone pale, her hands twisted in her lap. I just needed somewhere safe, she whispered. I didn't mean to… Safe? Silas laughed, a terrible sound. More like breaking than mirth. There ain't no safe. Don't you understand that? Whitmore's coming back with a federal marshal. He's got the law, the church, the whole damn territory behind him. And I got nothing but a lie about letters that don't exist. Then I'll go. Ruth Ann stood, her voice small but steady. I'll leave tonight. He won't bother you if I'm gone. I didn't mean… But she was already moving, already backing toward the door, her face closed off the way it had been that first night, waiting for the blow, expecting the betrayal. Ruth Ann, wait. She stopped in the doorway, turned, and her eyes, Eleanor's eyes, were full of something worse than fear, full of hope dying. I ain't your kin, she said. You said so yourself. You ain't nothing to me. He hadn't said that. Had he? The words jumbled in his head, tangled with anger and grief and 19 years of locked doors. I ain't her, Ruth Ann said. I ain't Clara. I know you wish I was, but I ain't. And I can't pay a debt I don't understand for people who are dead and gone. Oh. She turned and walked out of the room, out of the hallway, out of the house. The front door opened, cold air rushed in, then the door closed, and she was gone. Into the snow, into the night, into the dark that had been waiting all along. Silas stood in the empty room. The doll lay where it had fallen on the white quilt, its glass eyes staring at the ceiling. Outside, the snow swallowed everything. Sound, sight, the small footprints of a girl running into the dark. He'd done it again. Driven someone away with his silence, his walls, his refusal to feel anything that might crack him open. Eleanor had left the same way, not in anger, but in exhaustion, in the slow death of hoping he would break and finding only stone. The door opened behind him. Jonas stood there, snow melting on his shoulders. His face was carved from something older than grief. She's gone, Silas said. I sent her out into… I know, I saw. We have to find her. Whitmore's men could be… I'll find her. Jonas didn't move. But first you're going to listen. Because there's something you should have known a long time ago, and I ain't carrying it no more. Silas turned. Something in Jonas's voice stopped him cold. Eleanor told me things, Jonas said. Before she left, things she couldn't tell you, because you wouldn't hear them. Jonas… She didn't leave because Clara died. The words fell like stones into still water. She left because you didn't. You turned a rock, Silas. Wouldn't cry, wouldn't speak the child's name. Locked that door and locked yourself behind it and expected Eleanor to grieve alone, same as she'd buried Clara alone. The room tilted. Silas put a hand against the wall. She waited 2 years for you to break, Jonas continued. Waited for you to hold her and weep with her and be human with her, but you just kept building. More cattle, more land, more walls. He paused. She told me she still loved you the day she rode off. Said she'd come back if you ever learned to feel again. She never came back. No, she died 3 years ago, alone, in a boarding house in Bozeman. Jonas's voice softened. I got the letter. Didn't tell you because she asked me not to. Said if you hadn't come by then, you weren't coming. Silas's legs gave out. He sank to the floor, back against the wall, hands hanging useless at his sides. The weight of it crushed him, not Clara's death, but everything after. The silence he'd chosen, the love he'd refused, the wife who'd died waiting for him to remember how to be human. That girl didn't come to collect a debt, Jonas said. She came to pay one. She came to give you a second chance. And you just sent her into a snowstorm because you're still too scared to let anyone in. I don't deserve… That's what makes it grace. Jonas crouched down, meeting his eyes. It ain't about deserving. It never was. He stood, walked to the door, turned back one last time. I'm going to find her. You're going to sit here and decide what kind of man you want to die as. His voice was steady and merciless. Because that choice is coming, Silas. Sooner than you think. He left. The door stayed open behind him. Silas sat on the floor of his daughter's room, surrounded by 19 years of dust, and wept for the first time since they'd put Claire in the ground. Snow fell all night. By morning, every sin was covered, but nothing was forgiven. Silas stood on the porch before dawn, watching the world turn white. The storm had gentled sometime in the small hours, shifting from fury to patience, and now the flakes came down soft and steady as breath. The cottonwoods were ghosts. The barn was a gray shape in the distance. The iron sun gate stood open at the end of the drive, half buried, waiting. Jonas had ridden out hours ago, hadn't come back. The silence, where his report should have been, was its own kind of answer. Silas went to the barn and saddled his horse. The bay mare, the one Ruth Anne had brushed that first full day, the one who'd stood calm beneath her small hands, The leather was cold, his fingers were clumsy. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't done anything but sit on the floor of Claire's room until the weeping stopped and something harder took its place. He mounted up and rode out into the white. The snow had erased everything. No tracks, no trails. The world was a blank page, and somewhere on it a girl was written in invisible ink, lost, alone, running from a man who'd promised her safety and then proved himself a liar. Silas rode past the gate. The chain lay buried now, a dark shape beneath the white. He didn't stop to dig it out, didn't stop for anything. The road toward town was empty. No riders, no wagons, no sign that anyone else existed in this frozen world. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks lost in cloud, and the valley stretched out below like a held breath. He didn't go to town, not yet. There was somewhere else he needed to be first. The hilltop cemetery sat a quarter-mile east of the house, on a rise where you could see the whole ranch spread out below. Eleanor had chosen the spot, said she wanted Clara to be able to watch the sunrise, to see the cattle moving in the spring, to know she was still part of the land, even after the land had taken her. Silas hadn't been up here in 3 years, hadn't been able to make himself climb the hill, face the stone, speak to the silence that never answered back. Today he climbed. The grave was half buried in snow. The stone was simple, gray granite, hand-carved letters, already softening with weather and time. Clara Eleanor Hartwell, 1874 to 1880, she was. Springtime, Silas dismounted, stood there. The wind had died, and the silence was so complete he could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the snow settling on his shoulders and hat. He knelt. The cold came through his trousers immediately, biting at his knees, but he didn't move. Just knelt there in the snow before his daughter's grave, a man made of stone, finally learning to crack. "I don't know how to do this," he said. His voice sounded strange in the silence, too loud, too human. "I never knew. Your mama tried to teach me, but I was too proud, too scared." The stone said nothing. The snow kept falling. "I thought if I didn't feel it, it couldn't hurt me. Built walls so high I couldn't see over them, locked doors so tight I forgot what was behind them." He looked at the carved letters of her name. "But you were always there, behind every wall, behind every door, waiting for me to be brave enough to remember." A crow called somewhere in the distance, the only other living sound in the world. "There's a girl," Silas said. "Name's Ruth Anne. She showed up at my window a few days ago, half frozen, beat half to death. She's got your mama's eyes. Got your grandmother's blood in her veins, though I didn't know it at first." He paused. "I think maybe your mama sent her, or maybe God did. Or maybe grace just works that way, shows up when you least expect it, wearing a face you almost recognize." And he thought about Ruth Ann's voice in the dark. "You got a sadness on you. I can see it." He thought about her hand on his arm in Clara's room. "That ain't your fault." He thought about the way she'd looked at him before she ran, hope dying in her eyes, waiting for the blow that always came. "I hurt her," he said. "Same way I hurt your mama. Same way I hurt everyone who ever tried to get close. Pushed her away because I was scared. Because feeling something for her felt like betraying you." The wind stirred. Snow swirled around the headstone like something restless. "But it ain't betrayal, is it?" Silas's voice cracked. "Loving someone new don't mean loving you less. It means—" He stopped, tried again. "It means proving the love was real, that it taught me something, that it made me better instead of worse." He reached out and brushed the snow from the top of the stone. The granite was cold as bone beneath his fingers. "I'm going to find her," he said. "Ruth Anne. I'm going to bring her home and keep her safe and be the man I should have been for you. For your mama." He stood, knees aching, heart aching worse. "I don't know if I can fix what I broke, but I'm going to try. That's all I got left. The trying." He looked down at the grave one last time. The snow was already filling in the letters of her name, softening them, covering them. "I love you, Clara. I never stopped. I just forgot how to say it." The wind picked up, the snow thickened. And somewhere beneath the white silence, Silas thought he heard something. A sound like laughter, like a child running through spring grass, like forgiveness made audible. He mounted his horse and turned toward town. The ride down the hill felt different than the ride up. The weight was still there, would always be there, but it had shifted somehow, settled, become something he could carry instead of something that carried him. Ruth Anne was out there, lost in the snow, or found by Jonas, or taken by Whitmore. He didn't know which. Didn't matter. He was going to find her either way, because Jonas was right. This wasn't about debt or blood or legal papers. This was about grace, unearned, undeserved, given freely to those who didn't know how to ask. Ruth Anne had come to give him a second chance, and he'd almost thrown it away because he was too scared to take it. Not anymore. He spurred the mare forward, and the snow parted before him like a curtain, like a door swinging open, like a world that had been waiting 19 years for him to finally walk through. He rode into town with no gun, no badge, and no law on his side. Just his word and a debt 19 years overdue. Dry Creek lay quiet under the snow. Smoke rose from chimneys and thin gray columns. A dog barked somewhere and was silenced. The street was empty, except for a buckboard outside the general store, and two horses tied in front of the church, one black, one gray, both well-fed and expensive, Whitmore's horses. Silas dismounted in front of the livery and handed his reins to the boy who came running. The boy looked at him with wide eyes. Everybody in town knew Silas Hartwell, knew his money and his solitude, and the rumors that clung to both like burrs. "Mr. Hartwell, sir, there's been—" "I know." Silas didn't slow down. "Where is she?" "The church." Deacon Whitmore brought her in this morning, said she was wandering on the road, half froze. But Silas was already walking. The First Methodist Church of Dry Creek was a white clapboard building with a bell tower that had gone silent. 3 winters ago, when the rope frayed and nobody bothered to fix it, Silas had helped build it, back when he still believed in building things, back when Eleanor still sang in the choir and Clara still squirmed in the pew beside him, too young to understand the sermons, but old enough to know that Sunday meant her father would sit still for 1 whole hour. He climbed the steps. The doors were heavy oak, iron-banded, built to last. He pushed them open and walked inside. The sanctuary stretched before him, rows of wooden pews, a center aisle worn smooth by decades of boots and grief, an altar at the far end with a plain wooden cross hanging behind it. Morning light came through the windows, gray and cold, falling in pale rectangles on the floor. And there, in the front pew, sat Ruth Anne. She was wrapped in a wool blanket, her hair damp, her face pale as candle wax. Beside her sat Deacon Whitmore, one soft hand resting on her shoulder like a brand of ownership. A man in a federal marshal's coat stood near the altar, arms crossed, watching. The congregation was there too. A dozen townspeople scattered through the pews. Widow Pratt from the general store, Doc Harlan with his red-veined nose, the Jensens from the feedlot, others Silas knew by face, if not by name. Sunday service wasn't for another hour, but word had spread. They'd come to watch. Whitmore looked up as Silas entered. His smile spread slow and satisfied. "Mr. Hartwell, how good of you to join us." Silas walked down the center aisle. His boots echoed on the wooden floor. He didn't look at the congregation, didn't look at the marshal, didn't look at anything but Ruth Ann's face. She saw him coming. Her eyes went wide, fear first, then confusion, then something fragile and desperate that made his chest ache. He stopped at the front pew, looked down at her. "You all right?" She nodded, didn't speak. Whitmore's hand tightened on her shoulder. "The child is fine," Whitmore said smoothly. "Frightened, cold, but safe now, thanks to God's providence." He stood, positioning himself between Silas and Ruth Anne. "She was found wandering the north road this morning, nearly frozen. One wonders what could have driven her out into such a storm." "I drove her out." Silas's voice was flat. "I said things I shouldn't have. Hurt her when I should have protected her." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Whitmore's smile flickered. "A confession," the deacon said. "How unexpected." "Ain't a confession. It's the truth. There's a difference, though I don't expect you'd know it." The marshal stepped forward. He was a hard-looking man, trail-weathered, with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm Marshal Briggs, out of Helena. I've got legal papers here that say this girl is Deacon Whitmore's ward. You got anything that says different?" "I got her word." "The word of a child?" "The word of a child who ran 15 miles in the dark to get away from a man who beats her." Silas turned to face the congregation. "Look at her arms. Go on, look, you'll see the bruises. Finger-shaped. The kind you get when someone grabs you hard enough to leave marks." As Whitmore's face tightened, "The child is clumsy. She falls. She flinches every time someone raises a hand near her, even to wave, even to scratch their own head." Silas's voice rose, filling the sanctuary. "That ain't clumsiness. That's what happens to a child who's learned that hands mean pain." Doc Harlan stood up slowly in his pew. His face was troubled. "I've treated that girl before," he said. 2 broken ribs last spring. She said she fell off a horse." He paused, swallowed. "I didn't believe it then. Didn't say nothing because," he looked at Whitmore, "because I owed money to the church fund. Because I was a coward." The murmur grew louder. Widow Pratt was staring at Whitmore with new eyes. The Jensens whispered to each other. Whitmore's mask cracked, just for a moment. Something ugly flashed beneath, cold and calculating and cruel. "This is slander," he said, voice rising. "Lies from a bitter hermit in a town drunk. The child is mine by law, by right, by the grace of God. God ain't got nothing to do with what you done." Silas stepped closer, and his voice dropped low, low enough that only Whitmore and Ruth Anne could hear. I've seen men like you before, men who use scripture like a whip, men who pray loud so nobody hears the screaming. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. You have no proof, no standing. No, I have blood. The words landed like a stone in still water. Silas turned to the marshal. Ruth Ann's grandmother was Eleanor Hartwell, my wife. Eleanor had a daughter before we married. Gave her up, kept it secret. That daughter was Ruth Ann's mother. He took a breath. That makes Ruth Anne my wife's granddaughter, my kin by marriage. And I'm claiming her. The marshal frowned. You got proof of that? I got letters. And the lie again. But it didn't feel like a lie anymore. It felt like a promise. And I got something else. Something that don't need paper to prove. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. Not letters. Something else. Something he'd grabbed from his desk before writing out. Not knowing why. Only knowing it mattered. The deed to the Millbrook parcel. 2,000 acres of prime grazing land. Worth more than most men would see in 10 lifetimes. I'm signing this over, Silas said. To the town. To the church. Whatever you want. In exchange for Ruth Ann's custody. Legal and binding. The sanctuary went silent. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Marshal Briggs took the deed, unfolded it, read it slow, lips moving slightly. When he looked up, his eyes had changed. Harder, warier, reassessing everything. 2,000 acres, lad, he said. That's a lot of land for a girl who ain't even blood. She's blood enough. Silas didn't look away. And land's just dirt. She's more than dirt. Whitmore stepped forward, face flushed. This is absurd. You can't buy a child. The law doesn't work that way. The law works, however men with power decide it works. Silas turned to face him fully. You taught me that, Deacon. When you used your church and your papers and your clean hands to beat a little girl and call it salvation, I never... Ruth Anne. She looked up at him. Those eyes, Eleanor's eyes, Clara's almost eyes, steady now, waiting. Tell them, Silas said. Tell them the truth. Whatever happens after, I'll stand by you, but they need to hear it from your mouth. She stood. The blanket fell from her shoulders. She was so small standing there in the front of the church, but her voice came out clear as spring water. He locks me in the cellar when I sin, she said, sometimes for days. He uses his belt when I talk back. He broke my ribs when I tried to run the first time. She looked at Whitmore, and there was no fear left in her face. Only truth. He prays real loud while he does it, says he's saving my soul. The congregation erupted. Widow Pratt rose to her feet. The Jensens were shouting. Doc Harlan had his head in his hands. Marshal Briggs folded the deed and tucked it inside his coat. Then he walked to Whitmore and took him by the arm. Deacon, I think you and I need to have a conversation down at the jail. This is outrageous. I am a man of God. God ain't the one pressing charges. The marshal's grip tightened. The territory of Montana is. He led Whitmore toward the door. The deacon twisted, looking back at Ruth Anne with something venomous in his eyes. You'll regret this, he hissed. Both of you. God sees everything. Ruth Anne didn't flinch. So do I. The doors closed behind them. The sanctuary fell quiet again, but a different kind of quiet. The quiet after a storm passes. The quiet of something ending and something else beginning. Ruth Anne stood alone in the aisle. She looked up at Silas, and her voice came out small. You gave away your land, for me. I gave away dirt. He knelt down so their eyes were level. You ain't dirt, Ruth Anne. You ain't a debt or a burden or a ghost. You're a child who deserved better than what the world gave you. He swallowed, and I'm sorry I made you think, even for a minute, that you wasn't wanted. Her chin trembled. You mean it? I mean it. She crashed into him, arms around his neck, face pressed against his shoulder, shaking with sobs she'd held in for God knows how long. He wrapped his arms around her and held on the way he should have held Clara, the way he should have held Eleanor, the way he'd been too scared to hold anyone for 19 years. The congregation watched in silence. Some of them were crying too, and outside, the snow had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, falling through the church windows in long golden beams, lighting up the dust motes like something holy. The snow had stopped by the time they reached the gate. She was the one who walked through first. The ride home had been quiet, the good kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't need filling. Ruth Anne sat in front of Silas on the bay mare, wrapped in his coat, her head leaning back against his chest. She'd fallen asleep somewhere around the creek crossing, exhaustion finally claiming what fear had held at bay. Jonas met them at the barn. He took the mare's reins without a word, but his eyes said everything. Relief, approval, something that might have been pride. He nodded once at Silas. Silas nodded back. Some things didn't need language. He carried Ruth Anne inside, and laid her on the settee, pulling Eleanor's wool blanket up to her chin. She stirred but didn't wake, just burrowed deeper into the warmth, a small sound escaping her lips that might have been contentment. Silas stood there watching her breathe. In and out, the rhythm of something alive and safe and home. Then he walked back outside. The iron sun gate stood open at the end of the drive, half buried in fresh snow. The chain lay where it had fallen days ago, rusted, ancient, no longer needed. Silas waded through the drifts until he reached it. He picked up the chain, held it in his hands, felt the weight of it. All those years of keeping the world out, keeping himself in, building walls against a grief that had only grown stronger in the dark. He walked to the barn and hung the chain on a nail beside the horse tack. Then he walked back to the gate. The iron sun caught at the last light of afternoon, golden now, almost warm, the rust looking less like decay and more like age, like something that had earned its years. He didn't close it, didn't even touch it, just left it standing open. That evening, the fire burned low, and the stars came out thick and cold. Ruth Anne woke to the smell of coffee and biscuits, Jonas's biscuits this time, which meant they were actually edible. She sat up on the settee, blanket clutched around her shoulders, and found Silas in the chair across from her. Same positions as their first night, same fire, same silence, but everything was different. "You came for me," she said. "I did, even after what I said about not being your kin." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You ain't Clara, I know that. Don't want you to be." He paused, finding the words. "But you're something I didn't know I needed until you showed up at my window, half froze and stubborn as a mule." A small smile tugged at her mouth. "Mama always said I was stubborn." "Your mama was right." Silence again. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved soft through the cottonwoods, gentle now, carrying nothing but cold air and starlight. Ruth Anne looked toward the window, the one that faced east toward the road, toward town. The lamp sat dark on the sill. She pushed off the blanket and crossed the room, found the matches on the ledge, struck one, touched it to the wick. The flame caught, small at first, then steady. Golden light spilled across the glass, pushing back the dark. "What's that for?" Silas asked. She turned to look at him. Eleanor's eyes, Clara's almost smile, something entirely her own. "So you can find your way home?" she said. "Case you ever forget." He'd spent 20 years building fences to keep the world out. Turned out all he needed was one small hand reaching through. Outside, the gate stood open. The snow glittered under the stars. And somewhere in the house, a child was humming, Amazing Grace, soft and off-key, the most beautiful sound Silas Hartwell had heard in 19 years. He closed his eyes. For the first time since they'd put Clara in the ground, he didn't dream of what he'd lost. He dreamed of what he'd found,